What becomes very, very clear is the power of good relationships lift you and bad relationships knock you to your knees and sometimes push you to the edge of questioning why you were put on this earth. Especially if the people who told you, I don't have time for you, I don't respect you, I have better things in my life than looking after you, are your parents. That may sound somewhat exaggerated, extremist, sensationalist, if you will. The work that I do addresses those comments. The work that I do primarily focuses on a theory of relationships that goes back 50 to 60 years, that started watching mummies and babies in Uganda and then went to look at children in foster homes in the United Kingdom, that has spread the world over, that I happen to be one of the people that researches. It's called attachment theory. It's about the way that we form our closest, most loving bonds and how, when they are done well, they broaden and build us as human beings. We take on life's challenges and we go on to do things that we didn't think were possible. But if those relationships don't turn out so well, we always question ourselves. Are we good enough? Will we ever measure up? Can anyone in this world be trusted? Is my only best friend me? Now, what I'm here to talk about tonight is about workplace relations. Funnily enough, some of the things that I've just spoken about play out in workplace relations. So I'm going to take what I've just said then, in its most extreme views which we study, and look at how some of those things play out in a workplace and take away all the technical jargon in the way that I see it, in the way that I operate as a leader, in the way that I've experienced being led. And I suspect many of the things that I will say will resonate with many of you in terms of things that have happened to you and the way that you potentially have gone on to lead in various organisations and in various roles. And when we talk about leading and managing people, it's not just at the highest level. There is this thing we call informal leadership. And sometimes that can be about how you just help a colleague in a time of need, how you celebrate their achievements when something fabulous happens. So I'm going to be talking about what matters and why. And I suspect that at the end of this presentation, you will come away on some level potentially underwhelmed, because you will go, but I know that. I'm here to provide you the evidence of what works. But here's the catch. We might know that, but being able to do it well, that's a completely different issue. In fact, in relationships, and I do a lot of work in the media, and I hear lots of things, people are very good at espousing advice. There's only one problem. They usually can't take their own advice. So let's press on. Let's start off with the State of the Union and why we should consider why relationships matter at work. And there are many reasons. But one of the most fundamental reasons is how much time we spend at work. In ABS stats that were part of the 2016 census, if you look at this particular table here, what you'll notice is there were about 43% of Australians that were surveyed, 15 years or older, that engage in 40 hours or more per week. Now, hands up if you would be doing more than 40 hours of work a week, or in a past life you did. I wouldn't sit anywhere near even 40. I'd be sitting somewhere between 50, 60, and that's probably a quieter week. In my worst weeks, I'm sitting at 90. Yeah? Not often, and you don't want to be sitting at 90, but I'm sure there would be people in this room for where that has happened, especially if you've had your own business, if you're in important leading roles. It is tough work. So we spend a lot of our weekly time in the workplace. Now here's something else for us to consider. Based on the work that I do, and the work of John Bowlby, who was seminal in developing this theory we called attachment theory, he said, we have an innate need for human connection. It spans the cradle to the grave. When we're first born, we need our parents there because we can't survive without them. Not only do we cry in distress when we need love, when we need comfort, when we need to be fed. But then we also do some other very cute things. We smile, we coo to get their attention in order to build that bond. But we also need that human connection at the end of our lives. Like when I held my mother when she took her last breath. And we looked at each other's eyes and we said, "It's okay, Mum. Time to go. We'll be fine." Was I comforting her? Was she comforting me? I'm not entirely sure, but I know in that moment it mattered. If we're spending so much time at work and we have a fundamental need for human connection, it makes sense that in the workplace, having meaningful, positive relationships, whether it be with work colleagues that then go on to become more than just colleagues, they become mates and friends, whether it be with our leaders, that they impact us in a deep way, personally and how we operate in the workplace. We have lots of evidence for this work that we've done and others have. It helps job satisfaction. It's not just about what you get out of the job. It's the world around you in the job, how people make you feel about your job. It definitely impacts job turnover. We've done quite a bit of work in this. In the area that I've done it in particular, it's been in aged care. Aged care has a really high turnover. In fact, it's a brutal area. How heavily it's regulated, the changes in policy, the hours that are worked. It is a tough space to work in. It's a tough space to do research in too. Sorry, I'll just take that back. The other issue related to turnover is not just whether you decide to leave the job. It's about the intention to leave the job. Have we ever been in those situations where there's no job out there, but we really do want to leave? But you have no other option. Financially, you just can't do it. And the intention to leave sits over you like a cloud. And sometimes the reason why we leave is because we just don't like the people we work with. Or the culture that is set is toxic. That has been driven by the people in it, often in the most influential of positions. The other thing is that good relationships foster what we call organisational citizenship behaviour. Basically what it means is that we're courteous, we're conscientious at our jobs, we're altruistic. In a world and in a marketplace where it's all about competition, this is lost. The fact that we will just do good things because it's nice to do for someone. So we're sportsmanlike as well, and we have this sense of civic duty, do right by the organisation. But there's no reason to really do that if the organisation isn't treating you well. There's another important thing we get out of positive relationships in the workplace. They empower us, they make us feel competent, they make us feel efficacious. What's it like being micromanaged? Have any of you been micromanaged? Do you feel empowered and efficacious? You don't really, do you? And yet someone who is a good leader or a good colleague makes you feel like, yes, I have value and I know what I'm doing. You can take the most competent person, and we've done these in experiments, mind you, where we give people false feedback that they are failing at a task that they could actually never succeed at. And what you do is you then look at their mood and their sense of efficacy after you've engaged in that experimentation, controlling for how competent they see themselves. You see a massive dip in their competence. And that's just in a few minutes. If you're doing that on a daily basis, what do you expect you're going to be reduced to? Here are some important things that came out of the Society of Human Resources Management. They do a survey every so often. And what this represents is the top 5 things that employees reported were critical to being engaged in their work and feeling positive about it. And what they rated is how satisfied they were with these particular factors. And here are the top 5. And what they said is to feel really engaged in my job, equally at the top, number one thing was relationships with co-workers. Opportunities to use skills and abilities was up there as well. But I've already said that those two things are tied together. And when you look at them, they are related. We then had meaningfulness to the job, the work itself, and relationships with your immediate supervisor. Funnily enough, when you look at those factors there, 3 of them relate to relationships. If you've got a good supervisor, then that's about building a positive relationship. If we're talking about co-workers, that's about relationship. If you're talking about opportunities to use skills and abilities, often it's co-workers. It's a manager who says, let's get you some professional development. I've noticed some things in you where we should give you this role. We should give you this task. So many of these things are tied in the relationships that we have in the workplace. If we think about what goes on in corporate life, even academic life, Deakin is an example where we've seen this transformational movement to try and unify a vision around processes and departments that has had considerable upheaval, but any major change brings with it that upheaval. And we see it across various sectors out there in the current day and age, especially when we think about this notion that technology is often seen as a disruptor. New ways of doing things via technology disrupts the way we've done it in the past. But it also is about innovation. We're always thinking forward. How can we do things better? How can we find new solutions to existing problems? And whether it's disruption or whether it's innovation, we're not just driving it. It's coming to us through technology, through people thinking differently and needing to say we've got to have a different worldview about how we do this. There needs to be a paradigm shift. Sometimes it's about the trends we're seeing. Just look at the digital trend and the digital age. What shifts have we seen in human behaviour as a function of that? Sometimes it's just about the needs of the organisation, its personnel, its clientele. And then there's Big Brother, regulatory pressures and changes. An example such as aged care is huge. One of the biggest transformational changes we're seeing in aged care is what is known as consumer-directed care. Have you heard of consumer-directed care? It's huge. We are driving some of the training around it because the government says, yes, give people choice. How to give choice to people who are losing their minds. Who takes ownership of that choice? How can they manage their own funds? How do we take an idea and turn it into something that is respectful, legitimate, and is sustainable? These are all the kinds of things that get us to feel we're in a state of change. We're in a state of disruption and a state of innovation. Here's the challenge though. These things are spoken with a cachet, often of positivity. We need disruption. We need innovation. But we're also creatures of habit. We like stability because we work hard to arrive at our worldviews. We work hard to arrive at our own training and our sense of competency. The minute you disrupt and innovate, some of us have to rethink what's our value, what's our place, how do we need to upskill. So while disruption and innovation can be a potential for opportunity, what's often not spoken about, and the thing that I look at quite a bit when I look at relationships, is how innovation and disruption create stress, concern and challenge. That's the elephant in the room. Because what we're now doing is when we think about disruption and innovation, we don't know what lies ahead. We think we do, but we're not sure because we're not there yet. And so what are we left with? We now have to manage risk, uncertainty and change. Now here's where my expertise comes in. What I know through my own last 10 to 15 years of research in this area, plus another 40 years around this kind of work and working with the leading people in this kind of area, is people need relationships more than ever when they are stressed. And here's the issue. If the relationship is fragile to start with, the stress makes the relationship worse. It doesn't make it better. Sometimes people have the idea when you put people under huge stress, greatness occurs. Like pressure on a diamond. And out comes the brilliance. No, it does not. Most of the time, it crumbles, it crashes, it burns. If it doesn't, something else was at play that no one saw. There was some kind of protective factor, some other form of resilience that shone through. In another part of my life, I'm a high-performance coach. I've been a martial artist for 35 years. I've trained little 5-year-old children that I adore, through to my heavyweights that tower over me that go on to win world titles. If we don't train conditions of stress and strain and get them to be strong through it, they will crumble when it's the world championship fight. They're not all of a sudden going to turn around and say, this is my moment. time to shine. The brilliance that someone sees was trained. It was prepared. The same thing goes on in our relationships. The reason that relationships function well in times of stress is because they are built well. They are cultivated well, so they withstand the stress. The stress depresses them. It hurts them, but they recover. They rebound. If the relationship is vulnerable, if it's taxed, it's very easy to break it in half. I've seen it enough in the work that I do. So in times of stress and strain, we need people. Having said that, let's do a little survey. Now, if you've got your mobile phones handy, I would like you to either, if you've got a QR scanner, bring up this, lock in on that QR code and it will bring up the survey. Or if not, you can put in this short address and we're going to do a survey together. If you don't have your mobile handy, etc., you don't want to take part, that's fine. That's not a problem. But what I'm now going to do is I'm going to quickly switch out of this and I'm going to go to this URL now. Okay. So I'm going to give you, pardon my back for a moment, I'm just going to give you some questions that I'd like your answers to. Here's the first one. Okay. And this should now be coming up on your phone, yes? Okay. So you are able to choose any or all of these things.
Can you just go back to the...
Yeah, just to get the URL? Of course. Yes, of course I can. Of course it is. Choose your own network. Of course it will. Okay, there it is. Yep. And mind you, if this fails, it's all right. We've got a backup. I've got the same questions where we can put up our hands and take a hand vote, okay?
So it cares about the upper and lower case, my goodness.
It is a little bit temperamental. Have we got it up? Not yet? Okay.
I got it up when I spelled it right.
If we're having some trouble, it's very easy. I'll just go to the questions and ask you some questions about it. No luck? Okay.
Mine just says your presenter will start the poll, please.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, if you can't get it up, just in the being mindful of time, you can kind of do this in your mind or even put your hand up. If you were to think about what matters most in developing or maintaining positive relationships in the workplace, to what extent would you pick these things? The first one is clear and effective communication. The second is keeping people focused on the task at hand, what needs to be done. The third is trust. The next one is cohesion amongst colleagues. Another word for cohesion is that you keep people tight-knit. Okay, there's good team spirit around them. The third one is support. The next one is support, both in times of challenge and in times of success, right? Recognition of achievements, motivating people to work more productively. We often hear about motivation and the importance of motivation.
So we just pick one?
You can pick more than one. You're allowed to pick more than one. You absolutely are. So even just with a small sample there, we begin to see that there is quite a spread. Communication, trust figure well. Cohesion, maybe not so much. Support is up there. I mean, when you look at them, you know, the votes are spread out to some extent. Funnily enough, no one's saying keep focused on the task at hand. There's a lot of emphasis on that in the workplace.
It forces us to pick a top three or something. Wonder if the number
Is it?
change, do you think?
It shouldn't be, but that gives us what I will say is this spread is what I would typically see. So what we're seeing here is a representation of what I would typically know. I'm going to move to the next question for you. If it'll let me. Okay. To what extent those things that you selected, whatever it was, to what extent do you think you do those well in the workplace in times of stress and strain? How well do you think you do them? Okay. Remember, this is anonymous. Put it as you will. So again, we're getting some spread. And mind you, even though we've only got 7 responses so far, it wouldn't look that different. This one would be up a little bit higher, but we do get a full spread. My question is, what happens if I took the word stress and strain away, or those words? Would that look different? Would you be doing it most of the time? So here's the catch. In times of stress and strain is where you need to do those things the most, and in times of stress and strain is when we don't. There's a reason for that. We're worried ourselves. We're needing to juggle our own worries and concerns, trying to put that aside to attend to someone else, and then work out, but should I be looking after myself first? Here's the thing. What we do know from the research that we do with parents and children and people who are in close relationships, those who do them very well will forego their own needs at a particular point in time to help the other one in need, and then say, and then I'll get my needs tended to. Deal with the other person first. Then I'll deal with what I need. When we are insecure in our relationships and we are concerned, we don't do that. The distress is so overwhelming for us that we focus on us rather than the other. This is not just about workplace development and workplace management. Some of these things are core that we kind of have to reconcile. And I suspect that most of the time, no one would tell it to you that way. When it matters most, do you do the things that matter to you? But when we flip it and we say, you're in distress, you would say, damn right, someone should do that for me. Let's continue. So let me bring some of what I've been talking about together in the following. The power and the role of others when we experience stress and challenge in the workplace. So let's assume that something is going on in the workplace that's stressful or challenging. It might be staff cuts. It might be the rollout of some new program where you're not sure how it's going to work. It might be changes in the organisational structure, which means that your job role is going to move. You may end up having to work with people that you never wanted to work with, and so on and so on. You report to people you don't want to. The giggles and the smiles say it all. When we are in those situations, we will feel uncertainty, fear or distress, despite what you tell anyone else. It's all good, we'll be fine. That's not what you say at home. Or if you do say that at home, that's not what you say to yourself privately in those times of vulnerability. You just do not. I can say it myself. So in times of stress and strain, we seek out others to help alleviate our distress. We do a pretty decent job ourselves, but when push comes to shove, you at least want an ear that you can bounce some stuff off. You don't even sometimes want advice, you just want someone who's going to sit there patiently and who's going to hear you out. The reason that we seek out others is because in times of stress or strain, we want that human connection. We want that stronger, wiser other to say, you know what, I'm not even sure what the answer is for you, but there might be a solution there. Or if you're really struggling, just come and talk to me. I'm here. I can be a sanctuary, even if the rest of the world is kind of against you. And that helps us regulate and alleviate our distress. If nothing else, it tells us go on and fight another day. Re-engage in the stress, re-engage in the challenge. So then we feel ready for the challenge. Here's the issue. Depending on how people do this for us, it can work out well or it can backfire. If people don't do a good job of regulating and helping us alleviate our distress, the feeling exacerbates. The feelings just continue. How many times have you heard someone turn around to you when you've got a real concern and say, just get over it? Harden up. What are you worried for? I came to you because I am worried. So then what happens is that doesn't help. It just exacerbates what you're feeling. So what happens? You go on to vent more. You might go on to seek support more. Some people have a tendency to do that. Some people will be more about, I didn't get what I want, I'm going to go back and ask again. I'm going to go back and ask again. And they ruminate. right? They go over the problem again and again in their mind. It just builds and it builds and it builds. Some other people, when they're not getting what they need, they do the opposite. They suppress their feelings. And the reason they suppress them is because constantly in life they've been rejected. So you go, well, why would I turn to someone anyway? I tried this once. They didn't give me what I needed. That's it. You can't trust anyone anyway. So what you do is in the workplace, everyone thinks everything's fine for you, or that you don't care because you don't say anything. It's not that the person necessarily doesn't care, but if they let it get too upset, they're not going to know how to deal with it. That's every time I keep pressing the pointer. So what happens is they say nothing, they avoid discussion, they avoid support, and you say, they're not particularly likeable. They're not a team player. They think they know it all. That's the presentation they might be giving you. Doesn't mean you necessarily know. So what happens if you are in any of these states and you're not having someone who's really there for you? What happens is it's just a feedback loop. This goes on again and again and again. And the distress just compounds and it compounds and it loads and it loads. And there's another thing you do. In times of uncertainty, we engage in social comparison. What does that mean? You compare yourself to others. How are they faring? Have they still got their job? Or are they working okay with them? How was their performance review compared to mine? Some people chronically do those things. But most of the time, the reason we do it is because we're in a state of uncertainty that has come about because of people in our workplace that have made us feel unsure, or the workplace itself. People play a powerful role not only in stress and challenge, but in success. We seek out others when we're successful too. Why? Because we want to share that success, because by them sharing in that success with us, they validate us, and also it enhances our ability to take on the next challenge. If people do a great job at this, we feel validated, we feel competent, we feel like we can go the extra mile. People see it. They know what we can do. So let's keep going. We experience pride, sense of accomplishment, positive emotions. Positive emotions drive us towards the same thing. And so we'll continue to seek out others. But if someone says, yeah, what, big deal, or they don't acknowledge you, or they point out the fault, even though what you did was actually pretty fantastic, maybe it wasn't perfect, and they appreciated your struggle to get it to that point, all you experience is invalidation. So what do you experience? Negative emotions. You might feel sad. You probably feel hurt. An interesting thing about emotional hurt. Emotional hurt lights up the same brain areas as physical pain. The brain doesn't distinguish between them. What helps us distinguish between physical and emotional hurt is our mind. But it lights up the same parts of the brain, same pain regions. And we develop animosity. Why would they say that after I've worked so hard? Why would they want to cut me down after I experienced that? What's that about? So you raise questions about the workplace and the people you work with. The colleague who's jealous when something great happened for you and you thought that they had your back. I'm now going to talk about various things that feed into what helps to broaden and build people in the workplace. I'm going to start with a macro factor, something that matters just overall that we see, and that's consultation. And everyone talks about consultation, the importance of consultation processes being transparent and like. Good consultation, whether it happens at a small level within a given team or at an organisational level, it does matter if it's done well because people feel that they're treated with respect. If the consultation progress really does take on their views, then it's as if their thoughts do matter. So they're feeling valued. Otherwise, if you don't consult with people but you want them to do stuff, it communicates something very different. That is that you are a means to an end. You're a unit of production. In one of the areas that I study, that's called dehumanization. Because you're actually treating someone as less than human, as if they don't have a mind, as if they don't have a will, as if they don't have thoughts, as if they're not going to feel stressed. You take all that out and say your opinion doesn't count. So that's why consultation can matter if it's done well. It helps mitigate risk in a time of change. You might be getting perspectives that you hadn't thought about before. You're also, as someone involved in an organisation, the way that the consultation process goes down tells you a lot about how leaders are going to manage that change. If it's not looking particularly consultative, you probably have a fair idea of what's going to lie ahead. And consultation is about fairness, and I do want to say something about fairness. There are two types of fairness or justice that we study in social psychology in particular. The first is what we call distributive justice, which is about outcomes and rewards. If you do this well, you will get this reward. If you don't do this well, here's the punishment, here's the cost. It could be in dollars, it could be in something else. The other one is process, what we call procedural justice. Transparency, having a voice being heard is all part of procedural justice. Interesting studies have been done, and I want you to use this for good and not evil. There were studies that were done that looked at having a person who is going to be given a verdict on a criminal case and had the opportunity to engage in their plea, versus in another situation where they did not have that opportunity. The decision that was going to be handed down in terms of the criminal offence was the same. But what we did is set up two conditions. One, you get a chance to have a voice, to have a say. In the other one, you do not. The decision doesn't change. The outcome is the same. In the condition where people were told you can have a say, they judged the decision more fairly than when they didn't. The outcome was the same. The fact that they felt they had a voice, it mattered to them in terms of it seeming more fair. Process matters. So half the time it's not about the outcome, it's about how you get there. You can also have a wonderful, successful outcome and you say, but it was treated miserably. Someone who shall remain nameless gave a talk about how they got the Olympics bid and how they won it when we got it in Sydney. And their main mantra that they shouted from the rooftops is, when my team were tired and didn't want to work, I told them to work harder. And he pointed with such conviction. I said, oh, so got the bid, feeling good, huge success. How did those team members feel at the end of it? Big reward, should be celebrating. Were they celebrating? I don't know. The bottom line is that the workplace is interpersonal. It's not just about productivity units, it's not just about outcomes, it's not just about dollars, even though those things absolutely matter, and sometimes they are the biggest priority in times of risk. That goes without saying. But many things do matter in the workplace that are about how we do relationships. A big one that a number of you raised is trust. Trust is about how confident you are that a person is going to behave the same way in the future. That's what trust is. So it's that you can depend on them. If you can't trust them, then you can't predict the world and how they're going to act. That's why trust matters so much. Not only in our close relationships, but in our workplace relationships. Support, and we talk about support lots, but the critical thing are these two words that sound simple and are the hardest to do. That when you provide support to someone, whether you're a leader or whether you're a work colleague, that it's sensitive and responsive. What does that mean? You detect whether they need help or not, and then you work out, what should I do? Have you ever had people that basically try to help you and they're telling you how to suck eggs? Thank you for that advice. I know what I need to do, it's just that I'm upset about it. Or it could be that they're giving you a piece of advice that you go, that's completely irrelevant, but it seems to be making you feel a lot better than it is me. There have been studies that have shown that you give someone support on one day and the next day they experience higher negative emotions and some depressive symptoms. Why? Because the support that you gave them was one that made them feel worse about themselves. Oh, let me help you with that. Good, take away their autonomy. They didn't say they wanted help with it. They just said that they were challenged by it. You know, when someone says to you, but all I was doing was trying to help. You ungrateful so-and-so. Ask the question, did the help that you give me was what I wanted? That matters. Sensitive and responsive is exactly that. Not all support is equal, not all support is good. As part of that, autonomy is important. Allowing people to make decisions, to take risks, and to back those risks. And particularly when we micromanage, that is lost. Related to that is recognition. And these go hand in hand. If you don't give people autonomy, what are you going to recognise? That they're happy to be micromanaged by you. some recognition. All of these things talk to the whole person, that they have feelings, that they have skills, that they have ambitions, that they can be vulnerable. We refer to this as organisational climate. It's in the literature. An organisation has these things going on. All of these things are relationship factors. They're not the only ones, but they are the central ones. Communication is something that we raise as being pretty important. We talk in a lot of the work we do about being a competent communicator, and there are so many workshops on communication. If you unlock good communication, you will get success. Well, you saw from the slide before it's not just about communication, but communication is an important vehicle. When we talk about being competent as a communicator, and I'm sure many of you would do this really well, part of it is about being considerate. That comes back to the support element I said. What do people need, and how do I frame this advice? How do I frame this difficult discussion? What should we do to acknowledge this person's contributions? The other is that the communication is direct. That doesn't mean it has to be nasty, but it needs to not mince words. Because sometimes we dance around issues by being indirect, especially when it's uncomfortable. The problem is that can fester because no one comes away clear on what the other is talking about. I think they're hinting at something, but they're not really telling me that. What do they really mean by what they're asking? Oh, yeah, I think that's been done all right. What are you saying, that it wasn't done well? Are you saying that it's good enough? What does that mean? Being honest matters, and that's the hardest thing to do, especially in times of stress and strain. But it's probably the time where it's appreciated the most. It's just we don't want to feel bad in what we have to say. So we're putting our own emotional state ahead of the person. And the other is being clear in what we're doing. These are 4 dimensions of being competent as a communicator. So actually being a good communicator is difficult work. It relates to some other work that we've been doing using this kind of model that I'll quickly explain. We talk about this as various communication patterns that people can use in the workplace, and they use in their close relationships. This has been out there for the last 30, 40 years. We can think of the way that we communicate with people based on these 2, I guess you could say, continuums. The first is whether you are active in what you say or whether you're passive, indirect, dance around the issue like we said. And the other is whether you are trying to be constructive or whether you are trying to be destructive. Sabotage a situation, sabotage a person, versus trying to help things along. Depending on what people are doing, they develop different ways of communicating. If, for example, you are passive and you really don't care and you're not out to help, you end up engaging in neglect. You don't engage in your work to the same passion, you might not turn up for meetings, you may not give particularly constructive feedback, etc. You just look withdrawn, like you don't care. If you're active though, and destructive, you engage in exit. You threaten to leave. You threaten other people in terms of their actions. If you don't do this, I will. They are being destructive towards you and towards an organisation. If we look at the constructive side, loyalty is where you say, I'll just hang in there because I'm sure things will get better. I believe in the organisation. I believe in the people. That's fine if trust hasn't been breached. If trust has been breached and you can't predict what's going to happen next and you are loyal, guess what? You're a target. You're vulnerable. Because the things that you would normally say in confidence or the things that you would trust in saying someone could be used against you. Loyalty is good when things are going well. Loyalty is bad when things are not going well. And sometimes that's also when you fail to speak up because you think things will be okay even though the writing is on the wall. The place we want to be as much of the time as we can is voice. Being constructive and being active in our language. If there's a problem, raise it, but do it in a considerate way. Understand where people are coming from, even if yourself is stressed. If it's not the right time to say it for you, don't say it then, but make a commitment to say it again after. We do that when we do with couples. Okay, you're both arguing like cat and dog right now. You're not getting anywhere. Take a breath. Go calm down, come back later and deal with it. Don't withdraw and say, I'm not going to deal with it again. Come back later. One of the things we say fosters All of these things we're talking about is leadership. And there are so many leadership programs out there, my goodness. I will tell you right now, most of them are not evidence-based. Don't trust the paper they're written on. If we think about what leadership is, really good leadership, it's bringing together the things we said about communication with helping to shape an organisational climate that has these elements, with one other very important thing, that you inspire people to be better and that you can help them innovate. It's not just you doing the innovation. Turn to your people for innovation. Sometimes they are the people that will lead. This is referred to as transformational leadership. This has a lot of evidence. This has been around for the last 20, 30 years. Transformational leadership is where you literally transform the culture and the place. People will even see mundane, day-to-day jobs as important because it's part of the big vision. It's about how we keep integrity. It's about how we keep checks and balances. It's about how we maintain standards. Rather than just saying, oh yeah, just do it. It's compliance. The kind of research that we do in our lab requires that kind of approach. We have couples coming in, we watch them engage in arguments, we videotape them, we code their behaviour. We cannot have people going out of line with the most basic of procedures, but they must understand the vision. They must understand the need for care, the need for having a civic duty. This highlights something very important. There's a distinction between leaders and managers, and often we think managers are in leadership positions. There's a difference. Sometimes they can be together, but oftentimes they're not. If we think about managerial roles, it's often about directing and controlling processes and people based on what's already been established by those above. There's often a big administrative component. It's about relying on control of processes and people, and it's about asking, how do you want something done and by when? Leadership is about setting direction, not just heeding to direction. It is about innovation, and in a way that people don't feel threatened. It's about inspiring trust. We can't take chances and leaps of faith if we don't know how each person is going to respond. And we don't ask the how and when, we ask what should we do and why are we doing it? What is the purpose? And sometimes we can do those things even on frontline management. So really what I'm talking about here is if we think about the full range of leadership behaviours, which is an evidence-based model, and we talk about this, imagine this circle being all that you could do as a leader. What we want most of that circle to be filled with is these transformational leadership behaviours, coupled with, but not to as much of an extent, what we call transactional behaviours. This is about making sure that tasks are done, keeping an eye on processes. You can't just be a visionary all the time and not know what's going on the ground. But notice that the overlap is not high. It's more about the transformational and some transactional. What we don't want is this. What we call passive avoidant leadership. It's called fighting fires. When a problem comes, that's when you step in to do something about it. Too late. That's not leadership. A few things to finish with. There was a recent study that was done of Australian leaders. 8,000 individuals across many thousands of workplaces. You can see there the range of people that were looked at. Here's what mattered most in that survey. Frontline leadership. Frontline leadership is who you directly report to. The cold face of where leadership starts and then goes up to the top. That's where it matters. And funnily enough, that is the leadership that matters the most in creating a positive climate. Because you can have what the CEO says, but if there's disconnect in between, people think it's a lie, even if the CEO really believes it. There's a loss in how that is transmitted. Many of these leaders are not mastering the basic things here, and even less so the interpersonal elements, which is what I was talking about. There's an underinvestment in leadership in this country, especially in the front line. And if we are investing in it, we're doing these wacky things. Unvalidated personality inventories, where if you learn about this person's personality, you can alter your behaviour based on that person's personality. No. You will rarely be able to do that, especially in times of stress or strain. You just have to learn how to take the good with the bad, but you don't have to be a chameleon changing the way that you do it. Most of this doesn't have much evidence. Emotional intelligence has been a big thing that's been promoted in organisations. There's only one problem. Being emotionally intelligent doesn't tell you how you need to engage in getting people to focus on a task. It doesn't teach you about how to interact with other people. It's how you can be emotionally intelligent with other people. That's not being interpersonal necessarily. Managing communication and conflict. Yes, it matters, but as you can see from what I've presented, it's a small part of good workplace relations. There's support. That's about fostering trust. You can be a fantastic communicator and no one trusts you. Geez, they talk great, but I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. And then we've got leadership and management often occurring at the most senior level, but those frontline leaders aren't getting it. So our most senior people have it, but then it's not transmitting. What I will tell you, being the relationship researcher I am, is most of any kind of leadership training or training that's done in the workplace doesn't foster the things that I'm talking about. You're not going to find it. What I can say is that leadership doesn't need to be hierarchical and it should be shared with everyone. Often what we find is that if you have too much hierarchy around leadership, you form cliques and in-groups and out-groups. Those ones up there, they're not like us down here. So you foster competition and you accentuate the differences rather than working towards a common goal. So what some organisations tend to do is they go for collaborative leadership, having leadership teams, even having key leaders at every level of the organisation and bouncing things around others. That can be really important because it helps to strengthen consultation. Basically, the take-home message of all of that is you get different contributions from different people that are acknowledged in important roles, and many hands make light work, right? It doesn't have to be the one individual. It doesn't have to be the one who's the saviour. To finish with, I just want to highlight some work that we've recently done in the aged care sector that focuses on the things I just spoke about as some evidence. So we had two groups of about 20 facilities in aged care, where we gave one group training that was to do with how you manage relationships. Because one of the biggest issues we found is even if you trained them on how to deal with people with dementia and depression, whatever they were learning was not being translated through the workplace. There were system breakdowns. So we said, wait a minute, you can't just upskill people. You have to work within the system. So we looked at their organisational culture and we put together around a 6-week program where we got them to work on these things and to develop their own organisational plan of how they were going to implement this after identifying the barriers. The long and the short of it is, we followed them for 12 months and we measured them just after the intervention, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months after. What did we find? By working on relationship factors, as well as developing their knowledge in dementia and depression, you have to do that skill-based work. But when the lion's share of work focused on here, what did we get? We got increases in their knowledge and their skills, in their sense of efficacy, and we saw systems change in referral processes. Doctors were talking to nurses. Management staff were talking to people on the ground. The people were being better taken care of. We've got that currently under review. My last slide. It doesn't matter what workplace or organisation we are in, relationships are hard work. It's in the case in the families, it's in the case in the workplace, but if you invest in them, the results are massive, right? Great things happen for the leader, for the employees, and for the organisation as a whole. Take-home message is a simple one, but so hard to do, but we can never lose sight of it. If you take care of each other and oneself, even in a sea of opportunity, disruption, innovation, you value people, you respect them, you support them, you make them feel competent, great things happen. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Gery about his research or his presentation? Anybody?
Can we get a copy of those slides?
Yeah, you sure? Yeah, of course you can.
And the voice recording, yeah.
And the voice recording.
That was fantastic, Gery. Thank you.
That's okay, no problems at all. Yes.
Lucy Schultz is with
Hi,
us.
Gery.
Hey Lucy, how are you?
Apologies for the
No worries.
the VLive train system.
That's okay.
But it was all good. The one thing that I wasn't sure whether you covered was
Yeah.
whether what happens when you might be the sort of leader that is trying to do some of these things at
Yep.
different levels in the organisation, but
Yeah.
the actual organisation itself
Yeah.
is quite passive and it's possibly a bit dysfunctional.
Right.
What do you do if you're a suppose if you're a good leader
Yeah.
in those circumstances, I mean, do you still have options? Can you change it? Or should you just...
Yeah, and I appreciate that some people are difficult to change. No matter how hard you try with some people, you're not going to change them. But I think the really important thing is that you tried. Because then you really know where you stand with them. Otherwise, you don't know, is it me or is it them? Or is it someone else in between? The kinds of things that we've done with organisations before, and I'm even thinking of some of the things that happen, in our own workplaces, is you just bring people together and you deal with the elephant in the room, which is, guys, we're just being too passive, or we're not performing in the way that we should. One of the things that we've done before, and this is very much in the aged care sector, right? People are really passive. One thing that we do in those contexts is we say to people, you are going to take charge of how we shape it. So what we find is the minute that we can help people and we can mentor them, but once we start to give them a voice and we say, you need to be in charge on how you're going to change this culture, it can be a game shifter because it changes the dialogue and it changes how they see their role in an organisation, if that makes sense. What you will also find is in those situations, those who are playing the squeaky wheel, those who don't want to come along on the ride, get called out. And the reason they do is because people start to get frustrated with them. They go, we're trying to do all this work and you're retarding us. And sometimes it can be people who are actually in quite influential positions. It's just things aren't happening their way anymore. But then you see a shift in the power balance. Then what happens is the leader's role is to manage that the kinds of things people are coming up with align with the vision of where you want to take them, right? And that, if there's any animosity that's occurring, you obviously have to deal with that. And there are various ways that you can do that we can talk about afterwards. But that's one example. That's only one, but that's a key example, I guess I'd say. It's hard work. Yeah. Yes.
Gery, my question is, do you see that I see myself as a servant leader?
Mm-hmm.
I think I've mentioned to you.
Yeah.
And also transformational leadership. Do you see it's getting embraced more now? Because I won't go into too detail.
Sure.
Work in a government agency.
Yeah.
And I sometimes think, does those leadership work in a hierarchical places?
Yeah, so I think there is a shift with some, but I think the shift is slower than people think. People talk the language beautifully. They can't do it. They can't do it. Because if you're one who really believes in service as a leader, one thing that you will learn very quickly, and I do even in my lab, and my lab's only 25 people, let's say, but there are days where you will spend your entire day dealing with people's emotional needs, their anxieties, their worries, and nothing else gets done. And by the end of it, you're actually really tired. And you also turn to yourself and go, I wish people would just relax for a second. That is not easy to do, and you have to keep yourself healthy and well and have good support people around you because it can wear you out. But if you do it really well, the changes you get in people are so totally worth it. I don't think when you're a good leader that there is much of an off switch when you're at work with your people around you. I think because of those things that I've just outlined, it's still slow going for people to be those kinds of leaders. Because you need to be, A, you've got to be committed to doing that. B, you've got to be honest and check in with yourself. And you also got to apologise when you mess it up. Because people really care about that. And sometimes it can be something really innocuous and you go, oh, geez, I saw the look in their face. I didn't frame that so well. I may have even embarrassed them. I didn't mean to. And you say, I didn't mean to, and you forget about it and you move on and you go, yeah, but for them it mattered. How many times will you remember something that happened 10, 15 years ago with someone that you can't get out of your head? And when you ask them, they don't even know it happened. But if you at least acknowledge it, go deal with it. And people will care.
Vulnerabilities.
Yeah, because we're not perfect and people don't expect us to be perfect. But funnily enough, when we engage in criticism and we tell people what to do, we're saying you're not perfect, but that's okay, I am. So that would be my answer to your question.
Gery,
Yes.
well, thank you for a start.
No worries.
Secondly, I work in the education sector.
Right.
In terms of leadership role as well.
Yeah.
Over many years. And consideration I have is certainly from a media political point of view, there's a constant change in terms of emphasis depending on the political climate of the time.
Yes.
And the journey around ensuring that the change management process is appropriate and considered, and it's ensuring also that people who've been in terms of longevity in the position, or
Right.
in terms of teachers in this case,
Mhm.
and parents often,
Mhm.
that, the change management considerations and the climate around social and the media perception of education
Yeah.
as a journey. I can acknowledge the fact that I could probably predict when the media are going to outline and bag out the education system,
Yeah, right.
and where all principals that I know of are extremely passionate around this area.
Mhm.
But you get bombarded often with regard to the media outlay and the political agenda being a change of curriculum, the change of emphasis,
Yes,
change
yes,
of
yes,
priorities,
Yes,
and financial considerations and so forth.
indeed.
So I suppose it's trying change management and awareness of change and the ability to overcome the hurdles that arise
Mhm.
is kind of interesting in terms of your lecture there.
Mhm.
What's your perception of? I know you've mentioned in the aged care system, but in terms of the education sector, what's your perception there?
Well, I mean, I think in some ways there are a number of parallels, because I think also when we have a sector in which there is such a, you could potentially say, vulnerable group, but I don't want to use it necessarily in a derogatory term, but vulnerable in the sense that young people, we're trying to shape their minds, we're trying to see them as the future of our country. And then we go to the other end of the spectrum where we're talking about people that have had, often long, successful lives, and now they've become very vulnerable just through cognitive impairment, etc. These are highly politicised issues where people can get runs on the board the minute that they put up their hand and say, Royal Commission time, for example. I guess what I would say is, in managing that change, I mean, the reality is that once the train leaves the station, you can't do much about the gender as it's been set by the government. That's the reality of it when those things happen. But, I even think some of the things that happen within our own sector, higher ed and otherwise, and the things I come back to with my people and when we talk about them at a school level, is irrespective of what is going on here, what do we commit to as a group in how we can get the best outcomes for people? And if that potentially also involves changing some of the dialogue and some of the levers, we can't control the vision, but some of the levers around it, how it is that we do it. And I find that at times when you have within your own groups and your own teams a consultative approach about how you're going to do that, and that they become fairly tight in the vision of how they want to execute some kind of vision in terms of an operational plan, I think you can see, good things happen there. And the other thing I find in those instances is people tend to become very innovative in how they can ensure that things that they want to put in place do become put in place, right? That's kind of a broad answer to the question, but I think the question you're asking is a broad one. But I do think it has a lot to do with that. In times of change, in times of challenge, finding out what motivates people, not to use it manipulative, but to find out how you can get the best out of them, and that everyone aligns with a mission that's shared, that everyone is passionate about, I think is critical. And I think that even in some instances I know that I've been in where we've gone, this is not a great situation we're in, but how do we make something of it, or how do we lead by example, or how do we help set part of the agenda, if not all of it, I think can be very empowering for people. Yeah.
Any
That's
other
all right.
questions? Well, please join me once again in thanking you.
All right.